story that has a lot of people talking tonight. Two Virginia Beach police officers have been found responsible for their role in India Kager's shooting death 3 years ago. 13 News Now reporter Chanu Her looked at what happens next if they decide to appeal. Chanu.
Yeah, Regina, this certainly is going to be a lengthy process should the city attorney and officers choose to appeal. A local attorney tells me there are multiple steps to this. After a jury ruled two Virginia Beach officers were liable in the death of India Kager, the deputy city attorney Christopher Boynton says they would look to appeal the decision and that this case was far from over. Local attorney Ed Booth says that process could take several months to complete once a petition is brought to the Virginia Supreme Court. It'd start with one of two phases. The first one, proving to the Virginia Supreme Court why they should consider the appeal in this case.
And the Virginia Supreme Court would then consider that petition and decide whether or not to grant a writ. And a writ basically is saying that we're going to hear the appeal.
Then the second part comes if a writ is granted.
At that point, the Supreme Court would then consider the merits of the case. And that's part two, and where they'll actually make a decision about winners and losers and errors in the trial court.
Booth says an appeal doesn't allow for new evidence to be submitted, just what was presented at circuit court.
So what the Supreme Court would be doing is considering those issues that were raised during the trial and considering the way that the trial court ruled on them.
And in this case, a jury awarded Kager's family with $800,000, money Booth says they may not see until the appeal process is resolved. Now, Boynton, the deputy city attorney, told us yesterday after court that they will have to brief city council first before moving forward with requesting an appeal. Chanu Her, 13 News Now.